My friends, one of the gifts of the Holy Spirit given at confirmation that I think is particularly problematic for the modern mind is the one called fear of the Lord. Fear of the Lord. And it's oftentimes kind of explained away by describing it fundamentally as a fear of offending God. Fair enough. There's a fear of offending those that we love, those who love us. And of course, we should be afraid of offending God. But it seems to me that the heart of this gift is in fact just what it sounds like. We are afraid of the Lord, not in terms of a servile fear, a fear of punishment, but we are aware of the radical otherness of God, the radical otherness of God. He is completely different than us. He is much, much more distant from us than he is close to us in terms of what we are and our own self-understanding. Now, of course, he also loves us tenderly. He wills us into being every single moment of our life. He has a plan for us. He knows us personally. But there is a greater distance between the Almighty and us than a similarity, than a closeness, even as we have made in the image and likeness of God. Why is this challenging for the modern mind? Why are we kind of embarrassed by this idea? I think part of it is because there has been an incredible emphasis in recent years, especially in preaching and in the teachings of the church, of our need for a personal relationship with God, which is incredibly important, foundationally important, but with an emphasis upon the familiarity of Jesus, his proximity to us, even wonderful evangelical methods such as The Chosen, which I can't recommend enough. Perhaps there's been an obscuring of the other reality that we hold in tension with the humanity of Jesus, his human nature, that is. He is a divine person. And that other reality that is obscured is the incredible, awesome otherness of God. In today's Holy Gospel, for which our parish is named, and in the first reading, when Abram is engulfed in a frightening, overwhelming darkness, we have a confrontation with this otherness of God. In today's Holy Gospel, Peter, James, and John, as they are taken by that cloud, the cloud that some spiritual writers have called the cloud of unknowing, they become frightened. And they become deeply, intensely aware that they are a creature and God is God. Some of you, maybe many of you, maybe most of you, have seen Raiders of the Lost Ark. And y'all remember when the Ark of the Covenant is opened up by the Nazis, and they look upon the interior of the Ark of the Covenant and their faces melt off? That's a pretty accurate biblical description of what happens when a human person comes into contact with God. They die. Their frailty cannot handle the presence of being itself, and they fade away like ashes, unless they are upheld by the Almighty, preserved by God. My brothers and sisters, I think that one of the challenges that we face as a church, and there are many, is a kind of a leveling out, a kind of an evisceration of this otherness of God. And we see it in 1,000 different ways. We see it in church architecture, where churches are built with an emphasis upon community and upon the membership of that community. And there's a beauty there and an importance there. Hear me out. I'm not saying it's either or, but I am saying that when there's an emphasis upon the community, when the otherness of worship is de-emphasized and our altar, with all respect, looks like a card table, it levels things out. And it communicates a certain understanding of what kind of a God we worship. I think also of much liturgical music. Not all, but I think it's undeniable that there's been an emphasis in many liturgical musical pieces on the community, gathering together, celebrating the Lord's presence among us. And again, there is great truth in that. But there also must be transcendence. There also must be an awareness that God is God and I am not. Even in parish life, including in Transfiguration, there is a great emphasis upon social engagement, upon gathering together outside of worship to be together as a people. Critically important. We're not going to stop doing that. That's, in fact, one of our emphases right now. Absolutely. But at times it can lead us to forget that what the parish absolutely and essentially is for is worshiping God, is offering sacrifice to God. And all of the other activities, every single one of them, every one of them, can be stripped away as long as that remains fast, the worship of the Almighty. What is it that we do in this church, in this building right here, in this space right here? What is it that we do? What do we believe that the essence of the thing is? If it is simply to gather together with fellow like-minded individuals and to get a kind of a pep talk, we're way off. We're way off. We gather together because we believe that in this tabernacle, God Himself resides. We gather together in this space because we believe that every time we celebrate the Holy Mass, Calvary itself is represented, mystically, invisibly, but present. We gather together because we believe that we are sinners and in need of God's mercy, a mercy that has been won by blood. And we partake in that blood sacrifice in an unbloody way every time we receive Holy Communion worthily and well. There are many things that I'm grateful for that Father Bear did here at Transfiguration. Every pastor who comes to a parish brings his own particular gifts and charisms and insights. And one particular gift that Father Bear bequeathed to this community, and there were many, is a beautiful sanctuary. And in that beautiful sanctuary is found three particular things that I'd like to speak very briefly about. One is our beautiful murals. The mural of Moses, the mural of Elijah. These two figures that are found at the Transfiguration. And both men, of course, representing the law, Moses and the prophets, Elijah, Jesus being the fulfillment of these things, also represent mysterious encounters with the other. In the mural depicting Moses, we see him in the presence of the burning bush, a God who communicates in this incredible, mysterious, miraculous way. The bush is on fire but not consumed. And Moses removes his shoes in the presence of the Almighty. And then in the mural of Elijah, he's in the midst of a confrontation with the prophets of Baal. Evil prophets who sought to enslave the Jewish people. And Elijah, in his confrontation with them, says to them a stirring line, "The God who answers by fire is the true and living God." But before the fire falls from heaven, similar to our experience in today's first reading, Elijah experiences profound darkness, the absence of God. And in the midst of that darkness, fire falls from heaven, and the prophets of Baal are summarily executed. And then in the center of our sanctuary, of course, is found our high altar. I'm incredibly proud of the fact that we have a high altar here at Transfiguration. And I'm proud and committed to continuing to use it. At this high altar, where we find the images of Peter, James, and John, those three special friends of the Lord allowed entry into this mystery, something incredible happens. Incredible. By means of the words of consecration, God Himself comes to dwell among us and offers Himself through His Son for our salvation. And God feeds His people with His own body and blood and gives them strength to continue the pilgrimage to heaven. Sometimes this use of the high altar is a source of consternation for some, a source of concern for some, and I want to speak about that. One of the reasons why I feel so strongly about the use of the high altar is because I do believe that it can communicate in a particularly powerful way and poignant way in the otherness of God and in the otherness of the activity of worship. Sometimes we can become convinced that worship, the worship of God and the sacraments, is fundamentally about us, about our experience, and we want to follow along. We want to see what is happening, and I understand that. I've heard from many, many individuals, both here at Transfiguration and elsewhere, about how critically important the reforms of the Second Vatican Council were to them. Mass in the vernacular, Mass in which we can see what is happening, and a whole new vista of God's life within us. And as individuals think about the Church's liturgical life before the Council, for many, that's not a happy memory at all, at all. It's a very gray, obscure, sad memory. But I also think that as the Church has gone through the changes of the Second Vatican Council, which I believe were profoundly important and good, if at times misinterpreted and misimplemented, one of the dangers that we've experienced, I think, is a pendulum swinging the other way. Whereas perhaps prior to the Council, I wasn't there, I hope you can tell, there was an overemphasis perhaps on dogma and doctrine, rules and regulations, memorization, all important, but there was perhaps not enough emphasis upon personal relationship, the importance of personal formation, the role of a well-formed conscience, experiential prayer of God, emotive prayer that can be so powerful for people. And now I am concerned that in many places, the pendulum indeed has swung the other way. And whereas there is a wonderful experience and explanation of God's personal relationship to us, we have also lost the transcendent. We've lost the awareness of the otherness of God and the sacrificial character of what we do here. And so it's my hope and my prayer that the use of the high altar and what is called ad orientem worship, towards the liturgical east, that is, priest and people facing together to God, that can help communicate the radical, mysterious nature of our prayer. Now, do not misunderstand me. The low altar absolutely will continue to be used, of course. There's great theological meaning and truth in the Mass celebrated face-to-face as well. There's points for both postures, I would say. But I also believe that the high altar, again, communicates something which we need emphasized now, and that is the otherness of God. Sometimes this posture of ad orientem is explained pejoratively as Father's got his back to the people. And again, as you might imagine, I prefer priest and people facing together, the same direction. But I also think, too, that this understanding of the priest turning his back upon the people, maybe that's actually not such a bad thing. Now, don't misunderstand me. I don't mean that the priest is called to abandon his flock. I certainly don't mean that the pastor and the priest is called to say, I'm all about God and not about the people. That would be a gross error, But the fact is that I celebrate the Mass and offer the Mass in a different way than you do. We all offer the Mass. We are one body. But there are different parts of that body that offer the sacrifice of Calvary differently. And for the priest, it is sacramentally, and I'm called to conform my life to that mystery. A mystery, by the way, that is profoundly intimate and nuptial. And you too, in your lives, in the lives of sacrifice and love and service, united to the sacramental celebration of the Mass, your lives too are lifted up into this mystery of the Eucharist. We need priests. The Church needs priests to offer the sacrifice of the Mass and to provide the sacraments of the Church. And so there is something to be said, I would say, for a different posture for the priest, who is called upon to ascend those steps ad altare Dei, to the altar of God, to do his job, which is to offer sacrifice for the people, and then to bring from that altar to the people of God the bread from heaven. There's a kind of a hierarchy there, not a hierarchy of goodness or badness or more or less, but a hierarchy of the movement of grace. We begin at the altar through the hands and the mouths of a sinful priest, given then down these steps like a waterfall to the people of God, who then themselves become sources of living water out in the world. My brothers and sisters, I urge you especially if you have some challenges with the use of the high altar. Again, I want to affirm those concerns. I don't dismiss them outright at all. I understand to the degree that I can. I understand. Again, I find it so compelling how deeply important those liturgical changes of the council were for so many, and I understand that. But we can have both. We can have rational worship, being able to follow along, participate, especially with our sound system, when the speakers work at least, But we don't need necessarily to see everything to offer the Mass of our lives. It's interesting, in the Eastern churches, the Orthodox and even Eastern Catholics, like Ukrainian Catholics, they have still what's called the iconostases. There's a kind of a wall, a literal wall, between the sanctuary and the congregation, filled with beautiful icons lifting up the mind and the heart. And while we here in the West do not have that, we still have a tradition that has become obscured recently, of the mystery of worship, of the mystery of God, all the while emphasizing also his intimacy, his fatherly love, his tenderness. We can have both. We're Catholic. We can have both. The both and. Both the intimacy of the Father and the transcendence of the Lord. And that certainly is what I desire for Transfiguration. Let us pray that Transfiguration may be both a place of transcendent worship, a place where we acknowledge the radical otherness of the Almighty, and a place of deep community, a place of love, a place of tenderness, a place that is a home. Let us strive to gather together as the people of the both and, with our eyes fixed upon heaven and our hands reached out to each other in service and in love.